Let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence. We let go. We relax in the awareness of your guidance available to us in this moment, as in every moment. We breathe into this realization and we give thanks. And so it is that together we say Amen. Well, everything is medicine. A friend of mine has been going through some rough stuff over the course of the last number of years. He was in our men's group back in the late 80s, early 90s, and he had an opportunity to move to Chile, outside of Santiago. He had a career opportunity down there, so he went to Chile. His family moved down there. And about 3 years ago, he came down with that thing called cancer. And so decided to move back to be near his wife's parents in California. And so over the course of the last several months, he and I have been talking about his challenges, and he was mentioning that he was feeling like he needed some spiritual sustenance. I pointed him to A Course in Miracles and hooked him up with a study group there, it turns out, about 5 miles from his house. And so we have talked a bit about A Course in Miracles and his experience with it. And he was relating over the course of the last several months, he was relating his work with a healing person down in Colorado Springs. He flies into Colorado Springs every once in a while to be with this healer. And so I was fascinated by his interest in and being drawn to this person in Colorado Springs. He also pointed me to a blog talking about indigenous peoples' healing principles, which it turns out are close to what this healer in Colorado Springs follows. So I was intrigued by the blog. It mentioned a work called The Sacred Science, both a video and a book. That video, by the way, the link to that video, it's a free online video, that is in the notes section of the bulletin. So check that out. It turns out I've just dropped into it, and I have not seen the full video. But based upon the book, which was mentioned in the blog, and I've read the book, I found it very fascinating. So I'm interested in spending some time with the video. But this writer, Nick Pelosi, went to the upper Amazon, in the Amazon basin between Peru and Brazil, in that area. And so he made this video about the practices of the shamans of that area. And of course the Amazon basin is vast, right? And there are many, 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 many various tribes in that area. And not all shamans in that area practice exactly as depicted in the video. But he did make the point that what the shamans in the upper Amazon are doing is very similar to what the shamans in Siberia do, and what the indigenous peoples around the planet, the principles, the healing principles that they use. And I found it interesting when I first began researching the work. I found it interesting that what was being presented was could be mapped to Unity's perspective on healing. And of course, the upper Amazonian shamans are of a different culture than Charles Myrtle Fillmore were, but unity came out of the healing experience of Myrtle Fillmore. And it was the healing of Myrtle Fillmore that stimulated Charles Fillmore to research the 7 major traditions of the world, to find, to look for commonalities. Aldous Huxley referred to it in the perennial philosophy as the golden thread. And this commonality of the 7 traditions that Fillmore came to was the impetus for his continuing write, to his and Myrtle Fillmore's continuing to write and eventually develop this thing called unity. So I want to be clear that Charles Fillmore did not mention plant medicine. He did not have, to my knowledge, he did not have an ayahuasca trip. He was very ensconced in the Christian tradition, but I found it particularly interesting that what he came to in the cultural context in which he was immersed, in which we are immersed, could be mapped to the healing principles that were found in the practices of the shamans of the Upper Amazon. I found this quote. It turns out this quote was in the book, The Sacred Science, and I found it interesting because it takes an overall look at illness, and it speaks of illness as pain. Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Think about that for just a moment. That your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun, so must you know pain. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician and drink his remedy in silence and tranquility. Perhaps in silence and gratitude. The point is that pain has a purpose. It is useful in our healing and evolution. The thought that this offers, or the thought stream that this offers, I find to be a very good restatement of our opportunity to use pain as a teacher. The work that came out of Nick Pelosi, he's the author of the book and the director of the video. The work that came out of Nick Pelosi is an interesting depiction of how indigenous peoples around the planet address this issue of illness. They look upon this illness that we hold not as something that should be gotten rid of, but rather something that we should learn from. And we, in Western allopathic therapy, we think of the invasion of our body temple, right? We think of the corruption of our body temple. But it's physical in nature, not so much, I mean, it's moving away from the pure physicality into an understanding that there is a mental or mind basis for the illnesses, many of the illnesses that we have. But this allopathic approach is to medicate that illness, to medicate that invasion, to get rid of that invasion without thought of the question of, well, is there anything here to learn other than to avoid room full of people with the flu or that source of contagion? So this perspective that the shamans have of the illness is something to be learned from. It is a teacher. There's a work that in The Sacred Science by Nick Pelosi, he offers a perspective that I've paraphrased to say that the operating principle of the shamanic medicine is to forget who you were so that you can remember who you will be. Forget who you were so that you can remember who you will be. Now, Charles Fillmore looks upon our existence, our incarnation, as being born, healed, and whole, and that our healing will bring us back to that wholeness. That it is not a matter of our being corrupted by. It's not a matter of our being permanently corrupted, but rather it is a matter of our being temporarily corrupted, that we can heal back to our wholeness. So this idea that the healing process in shamanic medicine is to forget who you were. There is the plant medicine, ayahuasca is one of the primary agents of this forgetting who you were. It is the breaking down of that sense of separation. It is an opportunity for us to realize, to make real in our experience, that connection with the all. So the ayahuasca experience is intriguing. I'm thinking about booking a flight to the upper Amazon to find an authentic healer. We hear about these ayahuasca practitioners that come to the U.S., right? And they do their thing. They charge $5,000 for a weekend to have this ayahuasca experience. That's not the kind of ayahuasca experience I would be intrigued by. But this idea that we have the opportunity to forget who we were so that we can remember who we will be points back to this idea that we are created healed and whole, and our healing brings us back to that wholeness that we are. So Pelosi offers us this in The Sacred Science. He says, what native healers are getting at is that everything happens to you in this life. Every single moment, good or bad, has a lesson to teach you. Everything that has ever happened to you and will ever occur around you can be seen through one of two lenses, medicine or poison. It's totally your choice, but your mindset will determine which choice you make. It's in keeping with an ancient observation by the Greek philosopher Epictetus, that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. I didn't realize that, that phrase I use often, I didn't realize that someone else had thought of it first. Rats! But that concept, of course, has been around since the ancients, right? And I'm not talking about the Greeks. I'm talking about the Ionians. I'm talking about the Byzantines. I'm talking about the civilizations that have arisen well into the distant past. Those people were intelligent people. They may not have had written language, or they may not have, we may not have discovered anything written by them, but the pre-recorded history was filled with people like you and I. Not that we have not that they had cell phones in their pocket, but that they were introspective. They understood that our relationships arise out of our worldview, and that studying our own worldview gives us an opportunity to heal ourselves. So this idea out of the ancients that it is how we respond to the events in our lives that determines the fulfillment, the happiness that we gain from our life experience. He goes on to say that when viewed from the shaman's perspective, Everything is medicine. It doesn't matter how painful, terrifying, or unpleasant the experience is. The master has learned how to transform these externalities into wisdom and fuel for greater spaciousness and compassion. When you think about the pain that you've had in the past, when you think about the relationships that have been conflicted, when you think about the opportunities that have arisen in your experience for you to feel this pain, it is insightful to understand that those experiences are your path to greater understanding. The breaking of the shell of your understanding is an opportunity for you to grow forth. As Gibran spoke of the breaking of the heart of the seed to be exposed to the sun, that the breaking of the heart of the seed allows that oak tree to grow. It allows that olive tree to grow because we have allowed ourselves not to try to patch up the crack, but rather to use the crack to open up to a greater understanding, to a greater perspective. And the healing practices of the shamans of the Upper Amazon and their use of the plant medicine is to dissolve our shell of understanding, to allow us to connect to a greater awareness of who we are as we relate to the all that is all. So I see that the principles that are expressed in the shamans of the Upper Amazon, the healing principles that they employ, are really the same kind of principles that we talk about in unity. As conveyed by Charles Fillmore, Christian Healing is the first book that Charles Fillmore wrote. It was published in 1911 or so. So it turns out that his thinking evolved over time, but as we look at the principles that he offers us in Christian Healing, we are made healed and whole and can return to that wholeness. Our thoughts have vast creative power and can be used in our healing. Prayer is an important avenue of healing. It's not about changing the conditions of our experience, but rather changing our consciousness such that we can address those conditions in a way that is evolutionary, that is expansive. It's not about patching the crack, but rather preparing our understanding, or preparing ourselves for a greater understanding of the conditions for which we are praying. Our understanding contains our healing possibilities. As Gibran pointed out, that the shell of our understanding is our limitation, and that the pain, the illness, can be a means of expanding that understanding. Our faith makes us whole. Our judgments detract from our healing, and unconditional love is the healing elixir. As we look at these principles and we study the shamanic healing principles of the Upper Amazon, we can map these principles to what they are doing. And they're using ayahuasca and other plant medicines. There are three primary plant medicines, but they're using those plant medicines as a means of breaking this shell of understanding. Fillmore is using unconditional love as the breaking of that shell. Okay? Unconditional love, allowing each and every person to come into your experience with whatever baggage they're carrying and realize that they are here for our growth and our expansion. So, as we take these principles and we apply them to the teachings of Jesus, there's a couple of passages I'd like to point you to. Matthew 5:21 to 26. You have heard that it was said in those to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, when you are coming into that state of prayer, when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to the court with him. Or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. This is not about a physical court that he's talking about. It's not about a judge in a robe with a gavel. What he's talking about is he's talking about the consciousness, the shell of consciousness that limits us. He's talking about dissolving your judgments, letting go of your judgment, allowing this unconditional love to come into your experience and bless you and bless them, whoever they are. Allow yourself to be open to the guidance of Spirit and to the healing elixir of unconditional love. And then the second passage from Jesus I'd like to share, Mark 5. Now, don't confuse this with Matthew, but Mark 5, 25 to 34. Now, there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in a crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that the power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, who touched me? He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. He did not claim that he was the healer. He claimed that she was the healer. Now, why is it that this passage is important? Because she had this idea that if she could just touch his clothes, she would be healed. And in touching his clothes, she realized the healing. Not because the healing moved from him to her, but rather because she realized, having touched his clothes, that she would be made well. She had that faith. And Jesus said that. Your faith has made you well. Because you thought that if you could touch me, that I would heal you. But it was your faith that healed you. It wasn't me. Okay? Now, the context of he looked all around to see who had done it, that he felt the power go forth from him. I'm going to offer that as poetic license of the narrator. Okay? I'm going to let the narrator, let that be part of the narrative without attributing that to Jesus himself. I'm going to let that be a part of the narrative. And you'll notice that teachers across all denominations sometimes take it literally, sometimes take it figuratively. And so as we look at this, what can we draw from this? We can draw from this the principle that it is our faith. It is our perspective. It is our worldview. It's what we expect to happen that causes our experience to be contorted to that fulfillment, right? But that's the third principle of unity, is that your thoughts manifest in your experience. Indeed, your thoughts are the basis of your faith, and your faith manifests in your experience. Your faith has made you well. Go. You are healed. Not because of me, but because of you. And that's what happens with the shamans. In my view, that's what happens with the shamans, is that they stir up this brew that causes a significant mind-altering experience. And that mind-altering experience, when you are in the midst of it, is absolutely real. Now, that's not to say that it's not real. I'm saying that from your perspective, when you are in the midst of it, it is absolutely real. And so that changes your consciousness. You have an expanded understanding, and in that expanded understanding, you are allowed the freedom to change your relationship with the all that is all. Do you see that? I mean, this isn't about illegal drugs. It's not about mind-altering experiences being false. It's about mind-altering experiences opening us up to a greater realization. I shared with you this experience. Back in the day, how long ago was it? It must have been 88 or 89. Good friend of ours, Linda's best friend from high school that lived in Boulder at the time. She's since moved to Salida. Her mom was in the hospital and in grave condition. Doctors had pulled her older sister, Amy, my brother's ex-wife. It's a very incestuous relationship. But my brother met Amy when I met Linda, okay, and literally in the same week. And they got married, and Linda, of course, she and I got married, but Ruth was in the hospital with very critical pneumonia. The doctor had pulled Amy, Linda's good friend's older sister, pulled Amy aside and said, there's no DNR directive here. What should we do? If we have to resuscitate, do you want us to or not? And so Amy was in the throes of this conversation at about 10 o'clock at night. Linda and I had this experience. Yes, it was drug-induced. Okay, it was a drug-induced. We had, I think it was a combination of mushrooms and ecstasy at the time. But we had this experience of being in this web, this connective web. And we had this impression that, wow, you know, if we could just pull Ruth into this web, and if we could allow Ruth in our consciousness to be cleansed. And so we held Ruth in this web of connectivity, and we, you know, in our minds, we massaged the bacteria out of her. And we didn't destroy the bacteria. That was not our intention. What our intention was to purify Ruth and to allow the bacteria to go on their way, to go on to their next experience of living, whatever that was, but to purify Ruth. This was such a powerful experience that we laid there for, I don't know how long it was. We were drug-induced. I don't know how long it was, but we finally said, you know, we've got to call Amy because this was such a powerful experience. We need to find out how Ruth is doing. And so, I don't know, maybe an hour, 2 hours later, we called Amy. And it was late at night, like 11:30 or 12 at night. And Amy, how's Ruth doing? And she says, you won't believe this. I just got back from the hospital. And the doctor pulled me aside and asked me about, you know, what should we do if they have to resuscitate. And we went back into the room, and there Ruth was pulling the things from her arms. She was taking this thing out of her throat, and she was sitting up in bed. And the doctor was absolutely flabbergasted. But Ruth went through this experience of, and she left the hospital the following day. They released her from the hospital the following, on whatever it was, Friday night, they were talking about what to do if they have to resuscitate. And on Saturday, mid-afternoon, she was released from the hospital. Was that a coincidence? In our experience, right there, we were connected with Ruth. And we were blessing Ruth, and we were blessing the contagion. Okay? So, was that real? To Linda and I, it was very real. To Ruth, it was very real. Although Ruth did not state that she felt any kind of external effect, right? Or external agent. I don't know. But the point is that when we allow the shell of our understanding to be broken open, when we allow our experience to reveal to us a greater truth, let us celebrate that. Let us not denigrate it as being, oh, well, that was just way out there. I can't believe that. No, I believe that because that was our experience. I believe that Linda and I were participants. Not that we were agents, but that we were participants in that healing experience that Ruth had. Ties in with how the shamans of the Upper Amazon cause us to forget who we are, who we were, so that we can remember who we will be. We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us come in with, I cast all my cares. I cast all my cares on you, God. I cast all my cares on you, and lay all my burdens in your presence. I cast all my cares on you, oh God. I cast all my cares on you, God. I cast all my cares on you. And even when I'm not sure what I should do, I cast all my cares on you, oh God. As we rest in this moment, as we allow ourselves to be embraced by the awareness of God, as we allow this awareness of God to permeate every aspect of our being, let us realize that we are whole and perfect, even if it appears to be otherwise. Let us come back to remember the wholeness of who we are, the wellness of who we are, as creations of the one God, the compassionate, the loving. We are whole And let us remember that we will be healed, if not already. And holding this wholeness and healing in mind, seeing this as the reality of who we are. We let go of all of those limited ideas that keep us from this wholeness, this realization of wholeness. We let go of the limited perspectives that limit our vision. We let go of the judgments that we lay upon our brothers and sisters and ourselves. We allow our expanded understanding to be the fuel for the faith that makes us well. And we allow this unconditional love to move through us into this moment, touching each and every one in this experience. And we realize the blessings that this unconditional love moving through us brings. Transformed, lifted, healed. That is who we are. And in this awareness, we come back to this time and space, sharing the words of Alleluia.